Washington is broken. Washington, and he said as much in one of his most recent correspondences. Interestingly enough, over the 14 years that he's been in leadership, he's done almost virtually nothing to change it. And under pressure from a group of members who have said that we're not any longer going to accept the status quo, we have been able to force some rules changes to make things better. Even so, we gave out, and look, we've been working on this since last summer. I worked personally on it since last summer when I went to the leader and said, I anticipate this moment. We would like to avoid this moment, so let's start working on all these issues right now. Issues that will work for the American people, because the American people don't care who the speaker is. The American people care that they're paying $5 for a dozen eggs. They care that they can't afford their energy bills. They care about a wide open border and rampant crime in their communities. They don't care about this. So how are we going to fix this if we keep doing the same things and getting the same outcomes? So in the summertime, we were rebuffed. I went back in the fall. Not really interested in talking. Once we get a very slim majority after we were told there was going to be this huge red wave, well, then the conversation got a little interesting. But even so, what do you want? What do you want? We said, you're the guy that wants to be speaker. Tell us, if you want to earn our vote, how we're going to transform this place so that there's a different outcome for the American people. Tell us how you're going to do that. Yet nothing. So finally, he said, put something down. I want to know what you want. So we did in the beginning of December. And even at that point, there were people that said, I will not vote for Kevin McCarthy. But yet, I'm still working to try and avoid this moment that we're at right now, the whole time. And so that's one question you should ask yourself. Instead of saying to these folks that are standing with me, why have you brought us to this point? Well, we surely haven't come here alone. There's one person that could have changed all this. All right? So we send the letter, you see the letter, you see what's in it, and we start working on some things. And in trueness and fairness, some things I think on the germaneness and single subject, I think we got to a decent place, but it was like pulling teeth, and it took 3 weeks. And none of the other stuff was being worked on during that period of time. And some of the big issues for people, the rules that hold the speaker, the most powerful person on this side of the building accountable, that Thomas Jefferson wrote, that stood for over 200 years, that speakers from Democrat to Republican during Civil War, World War, pandemic, close majorities, large majorities, somehow whatever Thomas Jefferson wrote is not good enough now. Well, it is good enough now. But yet, we still can't get to this point. So now we're at the 11th hour and we're saying we want to avoid this. So we'll put a deal together to get 218 votes, including some of the people that have said, I'm never voting for Kevin. Look, that's a tall order at this point. We take it to him. We list the things. And by the way, he said, who do you want on these committees? Who do you want? Okay, well, we'll give you the names of who. There's a peril to doing that up front. But we waited till last night. Okay, well, we'll try our last best final offer. And then he comes out and he says it's a personal wish list. He requested that from us. Right. He requested that. Now, we said we can get you to 218 with this. He stood up and he shook our hands and he said, I can't do it, or I won't do it. And here we are.
So I've said from the beginning that my hard line was the motion to vacate. Single member motion to vacate. You cannot demand more responsibility and less accountability. And Kevin McCarthy was taking the path of Nancy Pelosi and following her precedents with the motion to vacate. We were just told when we left this door, we will give you single member motion to vacate. Just today. That was the starting point for negotiations. That was the starting point to everything that we are wanting to transform the way Washington, D.C. operates. If you go to the American people and ask them if Congress is doing a good job, if they like the way things are run in Washington, D.C., you're probably going to get a big hell no. We want to change the way things are done here. We didn't offer up a personal wish list. We were told to provide lists of what members need to be seated on what committees. And we did exactly that. And then there were amazing items that were listed as well for our border security, for term limits. Just bring the bill to the floor so we can have a vote on term limits. That's what the majority of Americans want to see in Congress. We said that any amendment that reduces the national debt needs to be made in order. This is not a personal wish list. This is not something that is unreasonable. This is just for the American people. This is fair for the American people. And so now here we are, being sworn at instead of being sworn in. And we could have had this solved months ago. I have been working every day to unify the Republican Party for the American people. And yesterday, we had a deal that was not a selfish deal in any way for Kevin McCarthy to get him the gavel on the first ballot, and he eagerly dismissed us.
Those of us who will not be voting for Kevin McCarthy today take no joy in this discomfort that this moment has brought. But if you want to drain the swamp, you cannot put the biggest alligator in charge of the exercise. I'm a Florida man, and I know of what I speak. We offered Kevin McCarthy terms last evening that he rejected. We sought a vote in the first quarter of the 118th Congress on term limits. He refused. We wanted a budget from the Republican Study Committee that balances on the floor in the first quarter. He refused. We wanted the border plan that the Texas delegation put together on the floor. He refused. And it is true that we struggle with trust with Mr. McCarthy, because time and again, his viewpoints, his positions, they shift like sands underneath you. Even Kevin McCarthy's own mentor recently said that the lies always change. And Mr. McCarthy is not only responsive to pressure from the right. Time and again, he has failed to achieve the goals that we seek on spending and on the fight. For months, we have been asking Mr. McCarthy for his battle plan. How do we ensure that we stand up for folks in the military who feel like they're being purged? How do we ensure that if there's the passage of a farm bill, it includes things like work requirements? And all we got was a handful of howdy and a mouthful of much obliged. So we do not want to be here at this moment. We would prefer to have a unity of purpose, but we will not continue to allow the uniparty to run this town without a fight. There's very little difference between Nancy Pelosi and her California delegation mate that seeks the gavel. And we want to change because this town is broken. And this is a person who has acknowledged in Mr. McCarthy that the town is broken, and he has been a part of that process for many years as a member of the leadership. We'll take some questions.
Let me ask the three of you a question here. So let me just clarify something. You're based on your remarks, Ms. Boebert's remarks, and Mr. Perry's remarks. Are you saying because we took things to this brink in the 11th hour right before the Speaker's vote, he is unqualified to be Speaker? In other words, a Speaker, a leader, would have worked this out a long time ago.
Well, yeah, I reject the premise of the question. We did not take this to the brink. For many months, we have been presenting these ideas to Mr. McCarthy, and we have gotten strung along, and only on New Year's Eve did we see changes to the rules. And what's interesting about the meeting we just had is our colleagues broadly celebrated rules changes that many of us had been fighting for to ensure that we had an opportunity to read the bills before voting on them so that we did not get log rolled with multiple pieces of legislation put together that don't have the same subject, so that we had germanity rules, so things like the National Defense Authorization Act wouldn't be amended onto a water infrastructure bill. And we did not get timely responses from Mr. McCarthy. We did not get substantive responses from Mr. McCarthy, because I think he thought that just by going on your network and others that he would browbeat us into submission to the swamp, and we're not going to do that.
So just to be clear, none of what you heard in there from McCarthy was enough to get your support.
Everything I heard hardened my resolve that this town desperately needs change, and if it's a few of us who have to stand in the breach to force it, we are willing to do so for as long as it takes.
So how many votes is
Can you
that?
clarify if he offered single-member motion to vacate in that meeting?
Kevin McCarthy personally did not, and not in that meeting. Staff brought it to our attention that they're willing to go there. It has still not been offered to me by Kevin McCarthy, and I want to make it very clear. We offered a deal. There were personnel requests because personnel is vital in the absence of trust. Personnel is policy. We made the deal. The deal was rejected, And as it stands, I will not be voting for Kevin McCarthy
there's
as
three
Speaker.
here.
Two questions. Was there any, do you think that you will be kicked off your committees? Do not vote.
Well, we were threatened by my committee chairman to be on the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Rogers, that if we did not vote for Mr. McCarthy, we would be removed from committees. Our position is that if Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House and we don't have an ability to ensure that there is oomph behind the agenda and energy behind our oversight, that the committee assignments don't mean that much anyway. I'm not here to participate in some puppet show where we pass a bunch of messaging bills, send them to the Senate, watch them die, fail to use leverage, and don't hold the Biden administration accountable. I don't want to relive the Benghazi experience where it's just theater pretending to be oversight. Right? We can do better than that, and that's our purpose today.
So you have 3 votes here. Are there not enough votes? We have 3 of you here. Are there 5, 10? How many people are in the same campaign?
You're going to see very shortly.
And
How many
times are you going to do this? 10 votes, 20 votes, all the votes you want?
Unless something changes, unless something dramatic changes, if you vote for somebody else on the first ballot and nothing changes on the second or third or whatever, what's going to compel you to change?
What needs to change from now until?
I think we've just outlined some of the things. I mean, this meeting wasn't about trying to inform people about what it takes to get to 218 and ask what you want. This was about a beatdown and a simulated unity in the room, which really doesn't exist.
Is that what they were trying to
He's the
do?
alternative,
I mean, beat you
Congressman
guys
Perry.
into submission? Is that what he was trying to do in this
What's
meeting?
that?
I mean, is that what he was trying to do in this meeting?
Well, there are certainly members when you're threatened with being kicked off your committees if you don't vote as you're ordered to. We literally had people in there telling us to take orders, and I can only speak for myself, but I suspect my colleagues here have the same sentiment. I don't take orders from anyone in this town. My orders come from my district and my constituents.
You're not the alternative to Kevin McCarthy, and you said if something changes, is it something that he can change that you can eventually support?
We took an offer to him last night with things that are completely and wholly within his purview. Completely and wholly within his purview. And he rejected it summarily.
So it's that offer or someone else?
What's that?
So it's that offer or someone else? What would be the thing that changes?
Well, if he wants to accept the offer, we're happy to join the discussion, but he hasn't accepted the offer.
Who is the alternative? Who
What
else will you vote
specifically
for
did you
Speaker?
ask for?
I'm sorry?
What specifically did you ask for? Congressman Boebert talked about.
Ms. Boebert just outlined some things, so did Mr. Gaetz. We've gone through.
Balanced budgets, the Texas border plan, the term limits legislation that is broadly popular throughout the country. Those were 3 features. Also on earmarks. We believe that there should be individual votes on earmarks. That was rejected by Mr. McCarthy. And if there's going to be an amendment to the floor, on the floor, in a Republican House, we think it ought to be made in order if it cuts spending and reduces the debt. We don't view these things as wild and crazy demands. They're in line with what most of the people want who live outside of the 202 area code.
If this ends with a Speaker Jeffries at the end, are you willing? Is that how far you're willing to go?
It will not end with a Speaker Jeffries. The only way there's a Speaker Jeffries is if Republicans cavort and are complicit with Democrats.
Who are you going to vote for?
I'm going to vote for Andy Biggs.
Okay.
There are 221 alternatives. There are
More than that
221.
even.
So Representative
Quite the
Boebert.
cliffhanger. Yeah, thank you all very much.
All right. So Republican Main Street Caucus leadership, Stephanie Bice, Kelly Armstrong, and Dusty Johnson. And we'll each talk for about a minute and then happy to take your questions. Listen, there's real work to get done. We do need to secure the border. We do need to address inflation. We do need to return fiscal sanity to this town. None of that can happen as long as we have 10 or 15 members who are holding back this progress. Our group is a group of between 70 and 80 pragmatic conservatives who want to make progress on the border and on spending. I think you have already heard that frustration was rising in the room because apparently 10% of the conference thinks they get to tell the other 90% when we get to start work. We're going to remain unified. Kevin McCarthy is the right guy to lead this conference. He's the right guy to be Speaker of the House. Stephanie.
You know, the American people are frustrated right now. They've seen one-party Democrat rule over the last 2 years, and they don't like it, which is why they elected a Republican majority in the House. It's time to step up and lead. And the individuals that are opposing McCarthy have, in my opinion, moved the goalpost time and time and time again. In the beginning, they have mentioned that they had presented rules, ideas to the Speaker-elect back in the summer. We didn't have the House in the summer. There's no point in negotiating with something that you don't have yet. And he waited. And that was the right decision. But now they keep moving the goalpost. And at the end of the day, this is where we are. We want Leader McCarthy to be the next Speaker of the House. And you have a vast majority of this conference that is unwilling to budge from that position.
Yeah, there's a small group of members in our conference who have a unique and, quite frankly, enviable political position. They win when they lose. If they lose to the Democrats, they can blame the left. If they lose to the Senate, they'll blame the swamp. If they lose to Republicans, they'll blame the establishment. And they'll continue down that path without ever actually having the responsibility of having to govern. We're going to test that theory today, and we might test it tomorrow, and we might test it the day after that. Because the vast majority of our conference believes that Kevin McCarthy is the right person to deliver on our agenda, to push back on the Biden administration, and to help us gain and retain and grow our majority. And that's the point. And we're going to continue to move down that path because we're going to find out where we're at. We're not doing this because we think it's better for Kevin or better for Dusty or better for Kelly. We're doing it because we think it's better for our constituents and better for the American people. And nobody cares about this inside baseball crowd.
Now, you
Take the questions. All right, we'll go here and we'll go here.
Now, you guys talked a minute ago. You talked specifically about Mr. McCarthy. Didn't have to work this out over the summer because you didn't know if you would have the majority. But that said, taking this to this point, is that a concern that maybe this should have been worked out at some point, and that does undercut his potential to lead the Republican conference?
Look, at the end of the day, McCarthy has made tremendous concessions to this small minority of individuals, a litany of things, some of which are actually very good. Rules changes, some of which I think are questionable. The motion to vacate, the majority of the members do not want a single individual to be able to make that motion. And there was a discussion around, a variety of numbers. Should it be a quarter of the conference, 50 members? It ended up at 5. Not everybody was happy with the 5-member motion to vacate threshold. But at the end of the day, that's where we are. He has made so many concessions. And then last night at the, 11th hour, it's another list of, well, if we can have these people on these committees, and we might be willing to get you to the 218. Where does it end? At what point do you stop and say, wait a minute, I'm the leader. I'm the one that's trying to move this conference forward, and you don't get to dictate what the rest of the conference does.